dresses and spread the smell of barbecues and roasting chestnuts across the cool evening air, already sharp with the promise of winter. A dozen songs rose and fell, somehow never clashing but always finding some harmony they could agree on. It was a time of celebration, of life and living, a final farewell for those passing through the forever door, and a time of comfort for those who stayed behind, or who had not yet worked up the courage to approach the door. Even those who are only partly alive can still fear the final darkness, the final mystery, but there was never any pressure or impatience. The door had always been there and always would be. In the meantime, it was carnival, so eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow is another day in Shadow's Fall. Leonard Ashe stood alone by a brightly colored tent offering mulled wine, the steaming cup forgotten in his hand. He looked out over the carnival, watching the people come and go, and wished he could be like them, happy in their everyday lives, full of hope and purpose and meaning. Ashe no longer had a future, and though he tried hard not to get too depressed about it, there were times when he missed the simple pleasures of planning things to do, places to go, people to meet. As it was, he went on from day to day and tried to be content with that. Ashe had been dead almost 3 years now, but he didn't like to complain. Like everyone else who was no longer entirely real, he could feel the constant call of the forever door, but he couldn't leave Shadow's Fall. Not yet. He looked out over the crowds at the town below, spread out in the growing gloom, its street lights glowing proudly against the coming night. No one knew how old the town was. It was older even than its own records. Ashe used to find its sense of permanence comforting, knowing that one thing at least was constant in an ever-changing world. But since his death, he'd discovered a growing sense of resentment at the knowledge that the town would go on quite happily without him, not needing or missing him in the least. He felt his leaving, as and when it finally happened, ought to leave a distinct gap, a space defined by his absence. He could accept the thought that his life hadn't mattered, but he liked to think he'd at least been noticed. He smiled sourly. He'd always been a loner by choice and temperament, and it was a bit late now to be having second thoughts. But, though he would have liked just to plunge into the carnival crowd and forget his problems in casual revelry, it wasn't in him. He'd always chosen his own path, gone his own way, and the comfort of crowds was denied him. A stilt walker lurched past, ducking his head now and again to avoid the strings of lamps crisscrossing above the tents and stalls. He doffed his battered top hat to Ashe, who nodded back politely. He'd never liked heights. He looked deliberately in a different direction and smiled as he spotted an Aunt Sally standing patiently before a dozen small children, her straw-filled stomach acting as a lucky dip for their eager hands. They all found toys or candy, and none of them were disappointed. The female scarecrow looked across at Ashe, a contented smile on her cloth face. She raised a ragged arm in greeting, and Ashe smiled back stiffly. Even a scarecrow was more alive than he was. He realized he was feeling sorry for himself again, but couldn't bring himself to give a damn. It was a dirty job, but someone had to do it. He looked around, searching for something to distract him. That was why he'd come out, after all. At the base of the hill, a Yeti and a Bigfoot were giving kids rides on their shoulders. A cartoon mouse with a giant mallet was chasing a cartoon cat, and 6 different versions of Robin Hood were holding an impromptu archery competition and arguing, more or less good-naturedly, as to which of them was the realer. All the usual faces, in other words. Just another evening in Shadow's Fall. Leonard Ashe was a tall, gangling sort, with an amiable face and hair that always looked as though it could use a good combing. Even at his best, he tended to look as if he'd left the house in a hurry. He had calm, thoughtful eyes that were sometimes